Forerunner is a specialist answer to the platform. Founded in 2012 by a former retail equity deep technology, and it turned a niche most firms ignored into a run of a category defining companies. Warby Parker, Glacier, Chime, or Forerunner competes on depth in a single domain and stays deliberately small to keep the edge sharp. This issue reads on how a consumer book is underwritten, why a narrow edge can beat a broader one, and what the model risks. Founded in 2012 by Kirsten Green, a former retail equity research analyst, Forerunner has raised close to $3 billion across 7 funds. The latest, a $500 million early-stage vehicle aimed at consumer AI, writing checks from a few $100,000 to up to $15 million across some 160 active companies out of more than 300 made. For scale, a single fund at the platform firm of previous issue can exceed Forerunner's entire history. Smallness here is a choice and not a limitation. The book, run of names most consumers would recognize, and includes 3 recent public exits. The reason for the same is that Green came to venture from retail equity research, and she brought its tools with her: forward behavior, retention, and the actual arithmetic of how a consumer business compounds. When she started, direct-to-consumer commerce was a contrarian niche most venture firms waved away as unscalable. Forerunner built the first specialized modern consumer practice around it and learned to treat a brand as an asset that can be measured and underwritten. The bet is on reading the consumer and not the code, a different discipline from the technology and the market underwriting of the firms earlier that we have shared in the series. Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel and welcome back to the template series. This series sits within our fundamentals to the noise series, and within the template series we examine how the world's most consequential pools of capital are actually built. Each issue takes a single institution, a conglomerate, a sovereign fund, a family holding company, a venture firm, and reads its portfolio from inside, what it owns, how the pieces fit together, and the one principle of construction that makes the whole thing work. The aim is not to track the performance or change tips, but to understand the architecture, why a firm concentrates or diversifies, how it engineers permanence, where that structure gives it an edge, and where the same structure sets a hard limit. Taken together, the issues map a spectrum from the maximal conviction of a 5-name book to the maximal breadth of owning almost every listed company on earth, with most real portfolios sitting somewhere in between. So essentially in this series, we are talking about fundamentals through the noise, the durable logic beneath famous names, drawn out one template at a time. In this episode of the template series, we'll focus on Forerunner Ventures, the case for a narrow edge. Where our previous issues firm, that is A16Z, grew into a sprawling platform, Forerunner did the opposite, staying small and early and underwriting one thing: the modern consumer better than anyone else. Forerunner is a specialist answer to the platform. Founded in 2012 by a former retail equity research analyst, it built the first modern consumer venture practice, backing brands and not deep technology, and it turned a niche most firms ignored into a run of a category-defining companies: Warby Parker, Glacier, Chime, Aura. Where the previous issues firm, that again A16Z, competed on breadth and scale, Forerunner competes on depth in a single domain and stays deliberately small to keep the edge sharp. This issue reads on how a consumer book is underwritten, why a narrow edge can beat a broader one, and what the model risks. As always, let's start with the portfolio. Forerunner is specialist by design, early stage, consumer only, and deliberately small besides the platforms of the industry. Founded in 2012 by Kirsten Green, a former retail equity research analyst, Forerunner has raised close to $3 billion across 7 funds. The latest, a $500 million early-stage vehicle aimed at consumer AI, writing checks from a few $100,000 to up to $15 million across some 160 active companies out of more than 300 made. For scale, a single fund at the platform firm of previous issue can exceed Forerunner's entire history. Smallness here is a choice and not a limitation. The book, run of names most consumers would recognize, and includes 3 recent public exits. The book, as you can see on your screens here, can be characterized as category-defining consumer bets. You have companies like Warby Parker, Dollar Shave Club, Glossier, Aura, Hims and Hers, and When we're talking in terms of outcomes, you can see that most of them are public, some of them are private but unicorn, and most of them have one thing in common, and that is being category defining. However, these are selected holdings and not the full book. The thesis has evolved from direct to consumer commerce into consumer health, consumer finance, and most recently, consumer AI. When we talk about the construction logic, the edge is not technology, but the consumer. Forerunner underwrites brand behavior and unit economics, applying an analyst rigor to a category that others dismissed. The reason for the same is that Green came to venture from retail equity research, and she brought its tools with her forward behavior, retention, and the actual arithmetic of how a consumer business compounds. When she started, direct-to-consumer commerce was a contrarian niche most venture firms waved away as unscalable. Forerunner built the first specialized modern consumer practice around it and learned to treat a brand as an asset that can be measured and underwritten. The bet is on reading the consumer and not the code, a different discipline from the technology and the market underwriting of the firms earlier that we have shared in the series. Depth is chosen deliberately over breadth. Forerunner competes on domain insight rather than scale or platform, and it stays early stage and small, roughly $3 billion across 7 funds. Because its edge is pattern recognition inside one category, the kind of advantage that dilutes rather than compounds if the mandate widens. That is the opposite structural choice to the platform of a previous issue, and this is a deliberate one. The harder test came when the category itself matured. As the cost of reaching consumers through digital advertising climbed, the pure direct-to-consumer playbook that made Forerunner's name stopped working as well. And the firm evolved its thesis rather than its domain, moving into consumer health with Aura and Hims and Hers, consumer finance with Chime, marketplaces with Fair, and now consumer AI. A specialist stays alive by following its category as it shifts. Forerunner has grown a partnership around its founder, a quiet succession being built inside the firm, still identified with the person who started it. As always, this brings us to the most important section of the template series videos: what the structure teaches. Forerunner is a specialist pool of venture. It concentrates its expertise even as it spreads its bets and argues that a narrow edge, deeply held, can beat a broad one. Forerunner concentrates on a single domain and within it still makes many bets. Concentration of focus, breadth of portfolios. These are the two poles the series has been contrasting, turned inward on one firm. It is the clearest case in the set that specialization is itself a strategy and not a lack of ambition. The transferable lesson is the oldest one in investing. Know one thing better than the people that you compete with. Green's sole advantage is that she reads consumers and the economics beneath them more rigorously than the generalists who treat the category as soft and unquantifiable. For an ordinary investor, the lesson is the discipline of staying inside a domain that one genuinely understands and treating brands and consumer loyalty not as vague virtues but as things that can be measured, tested, and underwritten. The limits cut the other way also. A firm concentrated in one category rises and falls with the category cycle. And when we are talking in terms of consumers, it's usually exposed to fashion trend and the shifting cost of reaching the consumers. The direct-to-consumer boom that built the firm's reputation turned to a bust when advertising grew expensive and a travel bet like Away sat in the eye of the epidemic. Consumer outliers can also be smaller than the enterprise and infrastructure giants, so the category quietly caps its own upside. The discipline of unit economic manages the risk, it does not erase it. As with every portfolio in the series that we have covered, focus is a deliberate design. Buying depth of insight at the price of exposure to a single domain's weather. And so we can conclude by saying that the narrow edge deeply held is a strategy. Forerunner underwrites the consumer, brand behavior, and unit economics better than most journalists do, and stays small and early to keep that edge sharp. The Cost is a book that lives and dies by one category cycle. That's all that we have for you in this episode of the Template series. Stay tuned in for the next one.